And here's the Writer's Almanac for Wednesday, April the 3rd, 2019. It's the birthday of Washington Irving, born New York City, 1783, who gave us the New York Knicks. He created the character of Dietrich Knickerbocker, a Dutch New Yorker, and Knickerbocker came to describe any New Yorkers who could trace their family to the original Dutch settlers. He wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow as well, and Rip Van Winkle, and was the first person who referred to New York City as Gotham. It's the birthday of a writer whose children's books have sold more than 20 million copies, Sandra Boynton, born in Orange, New Jersey, 1953. Majored in English at Yale, waited on tables during the summer, and then set out to design greeting cards, which were printed up by her uncle. She went store to store around the East Coast selling them. She worked for an alternative greeting card company, Recycled Paper Greetings, designed about 5,000 of them, including the Hippo Birdie 2U's Happy Birthday card in 1975. And 2 years later, her first children's book came out, Hippos Go Berserk. She's since written Chocolate, The Consuming Passion, and Philadelphia Chickens, and composed a book with CD album called Grunt, Pygorian Chant, plain chant written in Latin and Pig Latin. Sandra Boynton, who said she has joyfully squandered an expensive education in producing works of no apparent usefulness. And it was on this day in 1948, President Harry Truman signed the European Recovery Program, also known as the Marshall Plan, which allocated more than $5 billion in aid to help revitalize European economies after World War II. That amount eventually grew to more than $13 billion. George Marshall was Secretary of State at the time. He liked the idea, became its spokesperson, went on a national tour to promote it. Whole cities in Europe had been destroyed, factories shut down. The winter of 1947, one of the coldest on record. Millions of people unemployed, homeless, freezing to death, and that's who the Marshall Plan was intended to help. Winston Churchill later called it the most unsordid act in history. It was on this day in 1888 the first of the so-called Whitechapel murders was committed in London. Over the next 3 years, 11 women, all of them prostitutes, were killed in grisly fashion, murders that have never been solved. At least 5 of them were thought to be the work of a single serial killer who became known as Jack the Ripper. The Whitechapel district in the East End of London, neighborhood famous for crime and poverty and squalor. The investigation into the killings was the first attempt to catch a murderer through the use of psychological profiling, but unsuccessful. The identity of Jack the Ripper has never been determined, and in 1891 the murders stopped. Here's a poem by Deborah Diggs entitled The Coat. I wore your clothes when you went out of town, your white or light blue shirts for my pajamas. I wear your coats now when I walk our dogs. Then we stop by to see the horses. This coat, bought at the fair, remember, so-called Tibetan wool, whose hood drawn tight around my head, my hair locked up against the cold, my heart a white flag lost among the snowdrifts. Except today, I saw a face like yours through those last wrenched months of your long illness, a man whose face was flying through his being, jaundiced, hardly here, at once recognizable. Forgive me, I was happy in your coat to see you. The Coat, a poem by Deborah Diggs from The Wind Blows Through the Doors of My Heart, published by Alfred A. Knopf and used by permission here on the Writer's Almanac. Be well, do good work, and keep in touch.
Happy National Poetry Month. I'm Hayden Saunier, and some of my poems have recently been featured on the Writer's Almanac. If you appreciate discovering new poetry through this program, please consider donating to the Writer's Almanac today. The link to donate is in the email newsletter, which you can sign up for at garrisonkeeler.com/subscribe.